The cold hit me the moment I stepped outside, sharp enough to make my lungs protest. February in Milan was unforgiving, especially at midnight when the wind scraped along the cobblestones and found every gap in my second-hand coat. I'd been on my feet for 11 hours, serving champagne to people who didn't notice I existed, and now I was walking home because the metro had closed and I couldn't justify the taxi fare. The venue behind me still glowed, Palazzo Corti's, all marble columns and golden light spilling onto the street. I'd worked the private event in the North Salon, the kind where security checked credentials twice and every guest wore something that cost more than my rent. My fingers still smelled like lemon from polishing glassware between service rounds, and my feet throbbed inside shoes I'd resoled myself. I should have left through the service entrance, but Marco, the floor manager, had waved me toward the front because they were loading equipment through the back. So I walked past the lingering guests, my uniform hidden under my coat, trying to be invisible the way I'd learned to be. That's when I saw him. He stood near the entrance, speaking quietly to a man in a charcoal suit. Even from 15 feet away, I could feel the difference in him. The way people oriented around him without seeming to move, the way the cold air itself seemed to hesitate before touching him. Dark hair swept back, a wool overcoat that probably cost what I made in 6 months, and a stillness that suggested he'd never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. Our eyes met for half a second as I passed. His were dark, unreadable, and they tracked me with the kind of attention that made my pulse stutter. Not leering, assessing, like he was nodding something he might need to remember later. I looked away fast and kept walking, but I felt his gaze follow me down the street until I turned the corner. My phone rang as I reached the bus shelter. Nana's number. My grandmother never called this late unless something was wrong, and my heart was already hammering when I answered. Nana, I switched to Italian without thinking, my voice tight. What happened? Her breath rattled on the other end, thin and frightened. Chiara, mi dispiace. I didn't want to worry you, but the pain is worse and I can't. I can't reach the pills and... I'm coming, I said immediately, already scanning the street for a taxi I couldn't afford. Stay on the phone with me. Tell me where the pain is. Have you called the night nurse? She hadn't. She'd been trying not to bother anyone, which was exactly like her. 78 years old, dying of cancer she'd hidden from me for 6 months, and still apologizing for needing help. I was so focused on her breathing, on calculating how fast I could get to her apartment in Lambrate, that I didn't hear the footsteps behind me. Miss. The voice was low, accented, controlled. I spun around, phone still pressed to my ear, and found him standing 3 feet away, the man from the palazzo. Up close, he was taller than I'd thought, his face all clean angles and dark eyes that missed nothing. The scent of expensive cologne reached me, something with cedar and smoke that didn't belong on a freezing street corner. I'm sorry, I have to. I gestured helplessly at the phone, where Nana was asking who I was talking to. You need transportation, he said. It wasn't a question. His Italian was flawless, northern inflection, but something in the way he stood told me he was used to giving orders in any language. My car is here. I don't. The words tangled. Nana's breathing was getting worse, and this stranger was offering help I desperately needed but couldn't possibly accept. He glanced past me, and a black sedan pulled up to the curb so smoothly I barely heard the engine. I'll have my driver take you wherever you need to go. No expectation, no charge. Your grandmother sounds like she needs you quickly. The fact that he'd understood everything, that he'd listened and acted in the span of seconds, should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something click into place. The terrible relief of someone competent taking control when you're drowning. Lambrate, I heard myself say, Via Conte Rosso. He opened the rear door himself, one hand extended to help me in. When I hesitated, he said quietly, I'm Luca Santoro. You worked the event tonight. You speak better Italian than half my staff and you clearly have somewhere important to be. This is not a favor, this is logistics. I got in the car. Through the window, as we pulled away, I watched him make a single gesture to the man in the charcoal suit. Then he was gone, swallowed by the golden light of the palazzo, and I was racing through dark streets toward Nana while trying to explain to her that no, I hadn't gotten into a stranger's car. Not exactly. Though even as I said it, I knew that's exactly what I'd done. The driver didn't speak. The interior smelled like leather and that same cedar smoke cologne. And somewhere in the back of my mind, underneath the panic about Nana and the surreal shock of the last 5 minutes, a small voice whispered that Luca Santoro hadn't offered me a ride out of kindness. He'd offered it because he'd heard me speak Italian like a native and decided I was useful. The question was, for what? Nana was on the couch when I arrived, her face gray with pain, the pill bottle on the floor where she'd knocked it trying to reach. I got her medication into her, called the night nurse who was supposed to have come at 10, and sat with her until the sharp edges of her breathing softened into something closer to sleep. "Who brought you?" she asked finally, her eyes still closed. "That wasn't a taxi." "Someone from the event," I said, which was true enough. "He offered." "Rich men don't offer things for free, Tesoro." "I know." But I stayed until dawn anyway, because leaving her alone in that apartment with its peeling wallpaper and the smell of sickness felt like abandonment. I'd moved to Milan 3 years ago for university, switched to night shifts when the money ran out, and watched my degree slip further out of reach with every month. Nana was the reason I stayed, her and the stubborn, stupid hope that I could still build something better than this. When I finally left, the morning light was cold and pale. I had 4 hours before my next shift at a different venue, which meant I could sleep for 2 if I didn't eat breakfast. I was halfway to the metro when a black sedan pulled alongside me. The same one from last night. The window lowered, and Luca Santoro looked out at me with those dark, unreadable eyes. He wore a different suit, charcoal, three-piece, immaculate, and somehow managed to make sitting in morning traffic look like a tactical position. "Get in," he said. Not a question, not quite an order, somewhere in between. "I have work," I said. "Not anymore. I've spoken to your agency. You're reassigned." My stomach dropped. Reassigned to what? To me? He pushed the door open. "I need a translator for a series of meetings. Italian, English, possibly French if you have it. 2 weeks full-time. I'll pay you what you'd make in 6 months, plus expenses. Your grandmother will have access to a private medical consultant starting today." I stared at him. The street was waking up around us. Delivery trucks, early commuters, the rattle of shop gates opening. And here was this man calmly rearranging my entire life like he was scheduling a car service. "Why?" I managed. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his expression. "Because you're competent, you speak the languages I need, and you're already involved." "I'm not involved in anything." "You got in my car last night. That made you visible." He leaned back, giving me space to decide. "The question is whether you stay visible as someone useful or someone vulnerable. I'd prefer the former. So would your grandmother." The threat wasn't in his words. It was in the casual way he'd mentioned Nana, the private medical consultant he'd somehow arranged in the 8 hours since I'd seen him. He'd looked into me. Fast. And he was right. I was already involved simply by being noticed. I got in the car. "Smart," he said, and pulled the door shut. As we merged into traffic, he handed me a slim leather folder. "Background on this week's schedule. Read it before we arrive at the office. Your first task is a contract review at 10. The other party will try to negotiate in French. Don't let them." I opened the folder with hands that wanted to shake. Inside were schedules, dossiers, photos of stern-looking men in expensive suits. No mention of what kind of business Luca Santoro actually conducted, but the careful way everyone's criminal affiliations were listed as import-export or private equity told me everything I needed to know. I'm not, I started. You're a translator, he interrupted smoothly. That's all. You listen, you convey meaning accurately, and you tell me when someone is lying. Everything else is logistics. Logistics. The way he said it made it sound clean, almost boring. But the folder in my lap was warm from being carried inside his coat, and it smelled like cedar and smoke, and decisions I couldn't take back. I looked out the window at Milan sliding past, the city I'd come to with dreams of degrees and legitimate work, and wondered exactly how far I'd just fallen. Or if maybe, despite everything, I'd just stopped falling and found ground. Even if that ground belonged to someone dangerous. The office was in a restored building near Porta Venezia, all 19th century bones and modern security. Luca led me through a marble lobby, where the receptionist greeted him with deference that looked like fear's polite cousin, then up a private elevator that required a key card and retinal scan. Excessive, I murmured. Necessary, he corrected. People in my position require certainty about who enters their space. His space turned out to be the entire top floor, open concept punctuated by glass-walled meeting rooms, sleek workstations occupied by staff who looked up when we entered and immediately looked away, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city I'd been navigating as an invisible worker for 3 years. From up here, Milan looked like possibility, like something I could touch if I just reached far enough. Chiara Morty, Luca said, and I realized someone had appeared beside us, a woman in her 40s with a tablet and an expression of ruthless efficiency. This is Elena. She manages operations. Elena, Chiara is our new translator. Get her set up with credentials, a workstation, and a briefing on protocol. Elena's sharp eyes assessed me in under 2 seconds. Languages. Italian, English, French, I said, then added, and enough Spanish to get by. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture relaxed fractionally. Good. We've needed someone competent since Dario left. Welcome aboard, Miss Morty. Try to last longer than 3 months. She walked away before I could ask what had happened to Dario. Luca guided me toward a glass office in the corner, his clearly from the way it commanded sight lines over the entire floor. Inside, everything was precisely arranged. Dark wood desk, leather chairs, a sidebar with bottles that probably cost more than my rent, and a single photograph on the credenza showing an older man with Luca's eyes and a smile that suggested warmth had once existed in this family's genetic code. Your workspace is adjacent, Luca said, nodding toward a smaller glass office beside his. Close enough for quick consultations, separate enough for privacy. The meeting at 10 is a contract negotiation with a French logistics firm. They'll try to bury unfavorable terms in complex language. Your job is to catch them. And if I do, then you'll have proven you're worth what I'm paying you. He said it without inflection, but I felt the weight of it. This was a test, not just of my language skills, but of whether I could operate in his world without flinching. I thought of Nana in that apartment, the pills she couldn't reach, the care she needed and I couldn't afford. I'll catch them, I said. Something flickered in his dark eyes. Approval, maybe, or just acknowledgement that I understood the terms. Good, Elena will bring you appropriate clothing. What you're wearing won't work. I glanced down at my worn jeans and sweater, heat rising in my face. I didn't exactly have time to pack for. It's logistics, not judgment, he interrupted, but his tone had gentled fractionally. In this world, presentation communicates power. I need you to look like you belong at the table, not serving it. He moved toward the door, then paused. The medical consultant will see your grandmother this afternoon. Dr. Bavaud, Swiss, one of the best palliative specialists in Europe. He'll assess what can be done to make her comfortable. My throat tightened. I can't afford. You're working for me now. Consider it part of your compensation. He met my eyes, and for a moment I saw something almost human underneath the control. I take care of my people, Miss Morty. It's simply good business. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in a glass office overlooking a city I thought I knew, holding a folder full of dangerous men's secrets and wondering what, exactly, I'd just agreed to become. Alina returned 20 minutes later with a garment bag and shoes that actually fit. "Change quickly," she said. "The French arrive in 40 minutes and they'll look for any excuse to dismiss you. Don't give them one." The clothing was perfect: tailored trousers, a silk blouse in deep emerald, a blazer that made me look competent and untouchable. When I caught my reflection in the glass, I barely recognized myself. I looked like I belonged here. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like the first step in forgetting who I'd been when I woke up this morning. The French were exactly as arrogant as I expected. 3 men in bespoke suits, all cold handshakes and practiced smiles, leading with compliments about the office while their eyes catalogued weaknesses. Luca met them in the largest conference room, Alina taking notes while I sat slightly behind and to his right, the translator's position, visible but not central. They opened in French, as predicted. The lead negotiator, Dubois, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, launched into a charming speech about partnership opportunities, mutual benefits, the exciting potential of expanding Luca's import connections into their distribution network. I translated smoothly, keeping my face neutral. But when they got to the contract terms, I started catching problems. Buried in Clause 17, a provision that would give them access to Luca's supplier network without reciprocal access to their clients. Hidden in the payment schedule, a delay structure that would keep Luca's capital tied up for 90 days while they operated on net 30 terms. And in the liability section, carefully worded in subjunctive constructions, language that would make Luca responsible for any regulatory issues on their end. I waited until Dubois finished his presentation, all smiles and handshakes, then leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Santoro, they're offering you exposure to their network in exchange for taking on all the financial and legal risk while giving them free access to your infrastructure." The temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. Dubois' smile froze. "I'm certain there's been a translation error." "No error," I said in perfect Parisian French. Clause 17, Article 6, Subsection 3. Le partenaire assume la responsabilité exclusive. The partner, singular, assumes exclusive responsibility. Combined with the access provisions in Section 2 and the payment terms in Section 9, you're asking Mr. Santoro to fund your expansion while absorbing your liability. Luca didn't move, but I felt his attention sharpen. Dubois recovered quickly, switching to rapid French aimed at his colleagues, something about unexpected complications and renegotiation parameters. "They're discussing whether to walk away or offer you a counter that's slightly less terrible," I said quietly to Luca. "The younger one thinks you won't notice if they just reword Clause 17. Dubois wants to try flattery first." Luca's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. When Dubois turned back, all apologies and revised offers, Luca raised one hand. "Gentlemen, I appreciate you making the trip. Alina will show you out. When you're ready to present terms that respect both parties equally, contact my office. Until then, I believe we're done." It was the most polite dismissal I'd ever witnessed, and also the most absolute. Dubois tried to salvage it with more French charm, but Luca simply stood, buttoned his jacket, and waited. They left. The moment the door closed, Alina let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Dario would have missed at least 2 of those clauses. "Well done, Miss Morty." Luca walked to the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at Milan. "Miss Morty, in your assessment, was that negotiation ever intended to be fair?" "No," I said immediately. "They came in planning to exploit you. The contract was designed to fail under scrutiny. They were counting on intimidation or incompetence. And yet they seemed surprised when you caught them. They assumed I was decorative. He turned and his eyes held that sharp attention again. That assumption is useful. Let them keep making it. Something in the way he said it made me realize this hadn't just been about the contract. It had been about showing me, and his staff, exactly what I could do, making my position here undeniable. Alina, arrange for Miss Morty to have full access to contract archives and negotiation backgrounds. If she's going to catch problems, she'll need context. He looked at me. You'll attend all meetings going forward. Logistics, contracts, even the social events. People reveal more than they intend when they think you're just the translator. What if they realize I'm more than that? Then they'll have to decide whether to negotiate honestly or walk away. He moved toward the door, then paused. Dr. Bavard will call you this afternoon. Take the call, even if we're in a meeting. Your grandmother is the priority. He said it like it was obvious, like building my loyalty was just another form of logistics. Maybe it was. But as I stood in that glass office, wearing clothes someone else had chosen, speaking languages that made me valuable instead of invisible, I couldn't quite name what I felt. Relief, maybe, or fear of how good it felt to matter. Or the creeping certainty that Luca Santoro had just wrapped the first thread of a beautiful chain around me, and I'd helped him do it. Dr. Bavard called at 3:15. I was in the middle of reviewing background files on an upcoming meeting when my phone lit up with a Swiss number. Luca saw me glance at it and made a small gesture, take it. I stepped into my glass office and answered. Dr. Bavard had a gentle voice and devastating news delivered with compassionate precision. Nana's cancer had metastasized beyond treatment. She had perhaps 3 months, possibly less. He could manage her pain, arrange for proper hospice care, ensure her remaining time was comfortable and dignified. But he couldn't save her. I must have made some sound, because suddenly Luca was there, closing the door behind him, giving me the illusion of privacy even though anyone could see through the glass. How long? He asked quietly. 3 months. My voice sounded strange, distant. He says he can make her comfortable, but... Then that's what we'll do. He said it with such certainty, like deciding Nana would die without pain was a business problem he could solve through sheer logistics. Dr. Bavard will arrange hospice services. I'll have someone retrofit her apartment with proper equipment, or if she'd prefer, we can move her somewhere with full-time care. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm arranging. He studied my face with that unreadable expression. You need to be functional, Miss Morty. That requires knowing your grandmother is properly cared for. This is practical, not charity. Practical, logistics. The way he framed everything as emotionless efficiency, when we both knew he was buying my compliance with the most valuable currency possible, Nana's comfort in her final months. And I was letting him, because the alternative was watching her suffer in that apartment, while I served champagne to people who didn't see me. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded once, then left me alone with my phone and the terrible knowledge that I just sold something I couldn't name for something I desperately needed. When I returned to the main floor 20 minutes later, face composed and hand steady, Alina was waiting with the next file. The evening meeting has been moved to 7, she said. Luca wants you to review these profiles first. Tonight's dinner includes several people who will test whether you can be trusted with sensitive information. How will they test that? Her smile was thin. By telling you things that aren't true and seeing if you repeat them, by watching who you look at when controversial topics arise, by offering you bribes disguised as opportunities. She handed me the file. Luca believes you'll pass. Don't prove him wrong. The file contained photographs and brief dossiers on 8 people, all with the same careful euphemisms about their business interests. Import-export, private equity, transportation logistics, consulting. Every single one of them was connected to organized crime. and I was about to have dinner with them as Luca Santoro's translator, which meant they'd see me as either an asset or a liability. There was no neutral ground in this world. I spent the next 3 hours memorizing names, faces, and the careful details of who was allied with whom, who'd betrayed whom, and who was currently under investigation by financial authorities. Alina added context where the files were vague, her explanations clinical and precise. Antonio Marchetti runs the Genoa corridor, shipping mostly, some involvement in labor disputes. He'll try to charm you, don't fall for it. Valentina Russo handles art acquisition, which is code for money laundering through galleries. She's brilliant and ruthless. If she asks about your background, keep it simple. Marco Talenti does pharmaceutical distribution. And yes, that means what you think it means. He'll ignore you completely, which means he's decided you're not a threat. Yet. By the time 7 o'clock arrived, I had a splitting headache and a thorough understanding of just how far from my morning shift at Palazzo Corti's I'd traveled. Luca collected me from my office at 6:45, now an evening where that made him look like old money and new danger combined. "You look prepared," he said, scanning my face. I looked terrified. "Good, fear makes you careful, careful keeps you alive." He offered his arm, formal and old-fashioned. "Stay close, translate accurately, and remember you work for me. Everyone at that table knows it. That makes you protected but also visible. Act accordingly." I took his arm, and we descended to the waiting car. The restaurant was the kind without a sign, where you needed to know it existed to find it. Private dining room in the back, circular table set for 9, candles and wine bottles that probably cost more than Nana's monthly rent. The others were already seated. I recognized them from Alina's briefings. Antonio with his politician smile, Valentina in black silk that probably came from Paris, Marco already drinking and looking bored. 4 others I'd studied, all watching as Luca entered with me on his arm. "Gentlemen, Valentina," Luca said smoothly. "This is Chiara Morti, my new translator. She'll be assisting with communications going forward." Antonio stood immediately all charm. "A pleasure, Miss Morti. Your Italian is exceptional. Are you Milanese?" "My grandmother is from Lombardy," I said carefully. "I grew up speaking both English and Italian." "Useful," Valentina murmured, her eyes sharp. "Luca has needed someone competent since Dario's unfortunate departure." The way she said, "unfortunate," made it clear Dario's departure hadn't been voluntary. We sat. The meal progressed through courses I barely tasted, the conversation flowing between Italian, English, and occasional French. I translated when asked, staying precisely neutral, watching the way information moved around the table like currency. They tested me, exactly as Alina had predicted. Antonio mentioned a shipment arriving next Thursday, then later said next Wednesday to see if I'd correct the discrepancy. I didn't, just translated both accurately and let Luca catch the lie himself. Marco offered me wine, then more wine, trying to see if I'd get careless. I accepted 1 glass and made it last 2 hours. Valentina asked about my previous work, all sympathy and interest, angling for details about whether I'd worked for anyone else in their world. I kept it vague: hospitality, events, translation work, nothing she could use. By the time dessert arrived, I could feel Luca's approval in the small relaxations of his posture. Then Valentina said in French, "She's much better than Dario, prettier too. I assume that's part of her compensation package." The table went quiet. I kept my face perfectly neutral and translated into Italian, word for word. Luca set down his wine glass with precision. "Valentina, I've always admired your business acumen. I'd hate for our association to end because you mistook my employee for my possession." His voice was silk over steel. Valentina smiled, unrepentant. "I meant no offense, Luca, simply observing that you seem to have refined your hearing process." I hire for competence. Miss Morty has proven hers today already. She caught terms in a French contract that would have cost me considerable resources. If you'd like to test her value further, I'm certain she could review your recent acquisition proposals and find similar problems. It was a perfect parry, defending me while simultaneously threatening to audit Valentina's operation. Valentina raised her glass in acknowledgement. Point taken. My apologies, Miss Morty. Welcome to the organization. The conversation moved on, but something had shifted. They'd tested me, and I'd passed. More importantly, Luca had defended me in a way that established boundaries without making me look weak. After dinner, as we walked to the car, he said quietly, "You handled that well." "You handled that well," I corrected. "I just translated." "You translated her insult accurately instead of softening it. That took nerve." He held the car door, his hand resting briefly on the small of my back, the gesture Alina had mentioned, public protection. "They'll respect you now. Fear you a little too, perhaps. Both are useful." As the car pulled away from the restaurant, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked like I belonged in this world now. The clothes, the composure, the careful neutrality. But I could still feel the ghost of Nana's apartment around me, the smell of sickness and old wallpaper and dreams deferred. "How do I stop this from changing who I am?" I asked quietly. Luca was silent for a long moment. "You don't. You decide who you want to become and build toward that instead. Everything else is just negotiation." He made it sound so simple. Like I hadn't just spent 5 hours dining with criminals who saw me as either an asset or a threat, while my dying grandmother slept in an apartment I could barely afford. Under the care of a doctor, I'd never have accessed without selling my services to a man whose business was built on things I didn't want to understand. Like any of this was actually a choice. But when we arrived back at my building, still shabby, still mine, Luca walked me to the door. "Dr. Bavaud will begin the apartment modifications tomorrow," he said. "Alina will coordinate timing with you. If your grandmother needs anything, call, day or night." "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because you're useful, because I need someone I can trust at the table, because your grandmother deserves better than dying alone while you serve drinks to strangers." He met my eyes. "Take your pick. They're all true." Then he was gone, back to the car, back to his world of logistics and leverage. I climbed the stairs to Nana's apartment and let myself in quietly. She was asleep on the couch, but the pill bottles were organized now, and there was a note on the table in elegant handwriting. Dr. Bavaud had been here, had adjusted her medications, had left instructions and his direct number. I sat beside her and watched her breathe. "I think I made a deal with the devil today," I whispered. She didn't wake, but her hand found mine in the darkness. And I realized I'd do it again, would make any deal necessary, if it meant she'd spend her final months without pain. Even if it cost me something I couldn't yet name. Even if the beautiful chain was already tightening around me, link by careful link. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of meetings, translations, and careful navigation of Luca's world. Alina had been right. People revealed more than they intended when they thought I was just the translator. I caught lies in contract negotiations, spotted hostile intentions in the subtext of seemingly friendly conversations, and learned to read the temperature of a room by watching who looked at whom when sensitive topics arose. Luca used me strategically, positioning me where my language skills provided advantage. A meeting with German investors who thought their side conversations were private. A negotiation with a Spanish firm that buried problems in idiomatic expressions. A dinner with French regulators where every word needed to be precisely calibrated. I was good at it, disturbingly good. And he rewarded competence exactly as he'd promised, not with praise, but with increased access and trust. Within a week, I had security clearance for files that detailed the full scope of his operations. transportation networks that moved both legitimate goods and less legitimate cargo, financial structures that existed in the gray space between legal and criminal, relationships with people whose photographs appeared in newspapers under headlines about organized crime. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt useful, seen, like I mattered in a way I never had while carrying champagne trays through parties where guests looked through me like glass. Nana's apartment was transformed. Dr. Bavaud had arranged for a proper hospital bed, medical equipment, and a rotation of nurses who came twice daily. The pain that had twisted her face for months eased under Bavaud's care, and she spent her days in comfort I'd never have been able to provide alone. "This man you work for," she said one afternoon when I visited during lunch. "He's dangerous, yes. Yes, but he treats you well." I thought about Luca's hand at my back in public spaces, the way he'd defended me at that dinner, how he'd arranged everything for Nana without making it feel like charity. In his way. She studied me with eyes that were still sharp despite the illness. "Your grandfather worked for a man like this once, before I knew him. He said it was like being warm and drowning at the same time, comfortable and trapped all at once." "What happened?" "He walked away, met me, chose something different." Her hand found mine, thin and cool. "But he walked away before he was in too deep, Tesoro. Once you're truly valuable to someone like that, leaving becomes complicated." I knew she was right. I also knew it was already too late. That night, Luca invited me to stay late after the staff had gone. Not for work, but to teach me something about his world that couldn't be found in files. "The people at that dinner," he said, pouring wine in his private office. "They respect you now because you've proven competent, but respect in this world is maintained through understanding the rules, unspoken ones. Such as, never ask direct questions about operations. Never repeat what you hear, even to other people in the organization. Never show weakness where rivals can see it. Never," he paused, choosing words carefully, "never confuse professional trust with personal safety. I protect you because you're valuable, but others might see you as leverage against me. Have I become a vulnerability for you?" He held my gaze. "Potentially, which is why you need to understand how to protect yourself. Alina is teaching you organizational structure. I'll teach you the rest." For the next hour, he explained the architecture of his world, who could be trusted, who was waiting for an opportunity to strike, which alliances were genuine and which were temporary treaties. He showed me contingency plans, escape routes, safe locations. "If something happens to me," he said finally, "Alina has instructions to ensure you and your grandmother are relocated safely. You'll be compensated for your time here and provided with documents that give you clean separation from the organization. You're planning for your own death. I'm planning for contingencies. That's how you survive in this business, by assuming the worst and preparing for it." It should have been chilling. Instead, it felt like the most honest thing anyone had ever told me. When I left that night, he walked me to the car, his car, driven by his driver because logistics meant I didn't take the metro anymore. "Chiara," he said, using my first name for the first time, "you're good at this work, better than most people I've employed, but don't mistake survival for safety. This world requires constant vigilance." "I understand." "Do you?" He studied my face in the dim light from the street lamps. "Because I'm starting to think you see this as rescue when it's actually just a different kind of trap." "Then why offer it?" "Because I needed someone competent and you needed resources. It's logistics." But something in his eyes suggested it had become more complicated than that. "Get some rest. We have the Milan meeting tomorrow. It's important." The meeting was with Alessandro Ferrero, one of Luca's oldest associates, and, according to Alina's briefing, increasingly unpredictable. Something about financial pressure and whispers that he was in negotiations with a rival organization. Watch him carefully, Alina had said. If he's planning to turn, you'll see it in how he negotiates. Room at a restaurant overlooking the Navigli, all exposed brick and intimate lighting. Alessandro arrived with two associates, all smiles and embraces, calling Luca Fredolo like they'd built this world together. Which, according to the files they had, 20 years ago, when Luca's father was still alive and the organization was smaller, hungrier. I sat slightly behind Luca, notepad ready, watching Alessandro's body language while translating the pleasantries. The negotiation was about expanding their joint operations into Germany. New routes, new partnerships, significant capital investment from both sides. Alessandro spoke in rapid Italian, his enthusiasm seeming genuine. But I caught the small things. How his eyes kept flicking to his phone, how one of his associates kept checking the time, how certain terms in the proposal were deliberately vague about liability and timeline. When they got to the investment structure, I leaned forward slightly. Mr. Santoro, they're proposing you fund 70% upfront while they retain controlling interest in the German operations. The return schedule assumes everything goes perfectly, with no provisions for delays or regulatory issues. Alessandro's smile tightened. Chiara, you misunderstand. This is how we've always structured partnerships. With respect, Mr. Ferrero, I've reviewed your previous agreements. This structure shifts significantly more risk to Mr. Santoro while limiting his control over operations. Luca's attention sharpened, but he remained outwardly relaxed. Alessandro, help me understand why I'd accept terms less favorable than what we've built our partnership on. Times are changing, Fredolo. The German market requires different approaches. Or you need capital quickly and are attempting to use our friendship as leverage. The temperature dropped. Alessandro's associates shifted in their seats. One reached for his phone, and Luca made a small gesture that had his own security moving to block the exit. Not threatening, just present. Luca, I don't appreciate the implication. Then, don't insult my intelligence with a proposal designed to drain my resources while you negotiate with Marchetti behind my back. The words hung in the air like broken glass. Alessandro's face went through several expressions before settling on resignation. He made a better offer. And you thought you'd take my money too, fund your transition by crippling my German expansion. Luca's voice remained perfectly calm, which somehow made it more frightening. We've been partners for 20 years, Alessandro. I expected better. You expected me to stay loyal while you build an empire and I manage scraps. Alessandro stood, anger finally breaking through. Your father would have shared power. You just accumulate it. My father died because he trusted the wrong people. Luca stood as well, buttoning his jacket with precise movements. I've offered you fair partnership for 2 decades. If you've chosen Marchetti's promises over our history, that's your decision. But don't pretend this is about power. It's about greed. And what are you going to do about it? The question hung there, loaded with implications about violence and retaliation. Luca smiled, cold and controlled. Nothing. You're free to leave, Alessandro, free to partner with Marchetti, free to chase whatever promises he's made you. I won't stop you. Alessandro blinked, clearly having expected threats. That's it. That's it, but understand, the moment you walk out that door, we're no longer partners, no longer friends. You'll be just another competitor in the market, subject to the same pressures as everyone else. He moved toward the exit, then paused. I won't come after you, Alessandro. I won't need to. Marchetti will do that work for me once you've outlived your usefulness to him. He walked out and I followed, my heart hammering. In the car, Luca was silent for several minutes, staring out at Milan sliding past the windows. I'm sorry, I said finally. For what? 20 years of partnership ended because I caught problems in a proposal. He turned to look at me. 20 years ended because he chose betrayal over honesty. You simply made the betrayal visible. That's your job. It's a terrible job. Something that might have been agreement flickered across his face. Yes, but necessary. He was quiet for another moment. Elena will restructure our German plans. We'll need to move quickly before Marchetti and Alessandro can establish their position. I'll need you working extended hours for the next week. Of course. And Chiara, he met my eyes. What you did today, catching that proposal, calling it out directly, that protected a significant portion of my resources. It also made you very valuable and very visible. Alessandro will remember you, so will Marchetti. Is that a problem? It's a fact. Whether it becomes a problem depends on how we manage it. His hand moved briefly to my shoulder, not the small of my back this time, something more personal. I meant what I said about protection. You're not just an employee anymore. You're someone who knows too much and has made enemies. That requires careful handling. I understood what he wasn't saying. I couldn't leave now even if I wanted to. I was too entangled, too informed, too dangerous as a loose end. The beautiful chain had tightened another notch. I need to see Nana, I said quietly. Of course, I'll have the driver take you. At the apartment, I found her sitting up in bed, looking more alert than she had in weeks. Dr. Bavaud's medications were working, buying her comfort if not time. You look troubled, Tesoro, she said. I told her about Alessandro, about catching his betrayal, about Luca's cold dismissal of a 20-year friendship. And you feel guilty, she said. I feel like I'm becoming something I don't recognize. She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Chiara, I knew a man once, your grandfather's employer before we met, Salvatore Santoro. He ran the same kind of business, made the same careful decisions. Your grandfather said Salvatore never made threats, never raised his voice. He just arranged things until problems solved themselves. My breath caught. Santoro. Luca's father, yes. I recognized the name when you mentioned your employer. Her eyes were bright with memory and medication. Your grandfather kept Salvatore's books, managed his accounts. Legal ones only. Your nonno had principles about what he'd touch. When he wanted to leave, Salvatore let him go. No threats, no leverage, just respect for the choice. Why are you telling me this? Because Salvatore had a son, and I imagine that son carries both his father's intelligence and the hardness that comes from losing a parent to this world. Your Luca probably learned that coldness the day Salvatore died. She squeezed my hand. But he also learned the value of letting people choose, I think. When the time comes, he'll let you go too. I don't think I can leave, Nana. I know too much. Then the question becomes, what will you build with what you know? Will you just survive in his world, or will you change it somehow? Her eyes drifted closed. Your grandfather chose to leave, but he always said someone needed to stay, to be the voice that reminded men like Salvatore that logistics involved human lives. I sat with her until she slept, her words circling in my mind. When I left, Elena called. Luca wants you at the office early tomorrow. The German restructure is already attracting attention. Marchetti made a move faster than expected. We're implementing contingency plans. What kind of contingency plans? The kind that require you to translate some very difficult conversations. She paused. And Chiara, pack a bag. There's a chance we'll need to relocate operations temporarily. She hung up before I could ask where. I stood on the street outside Nana's building, cold wind cutting through my coat, and realized I'd crossed a threshold I couldn't see back across. 2 weeks ago, I'd been invisible, serving champagne, walking home in the cold, watching my dreams defer into impossibility. Now I was visible, valuable, and in the center of something that was about to escalate into open conflict. And the man who'd made me visible was either my salvation or my doom. I couldn't yet tell which. The office was tense when I arrived at 6 a.m. Elena had converted the main conference room into an operations center, with maps, schedules, and secure phone lines. Luca was already there, in shirt sleeves and sharp focus, coordinating with his security team. Marchetti moved assets into our Stuttgart corridor overnight, he said without preamble. He's using Alessandro's infrastructure to undercut our rates and pressure our partners. It's aggressive and poorly planned, which means he's trying to force a reaction. What kind of reaction? Violence. He wants me to respond with force so he can position himself as the reasonable party when the authorities inevitably investigate. Luca pulled up a map on the screen. We're not giving him that satisfaction. Instead, we're going to make his Stuttgart operation financially untenable while relocating our German partners to alternate routes. That's the contingency plan, just outmaneuvering him. That's always the plan. Violence is expensive and draws attention. Better to make him overextend until his own organization questions his judgment. He glanced at me. I need you to contact our German partners directly in German to show we're serious. Explain the situation, offer improved terms, and make it clear we're the stable choice. For the next 8 hours, I worked the phones, translating Luca's logistics into reassurances and improved contracts. Most of the German partners jumped immediately. They'd worked with Luca long enough to trust his stability over Marchetti's aggressive promises. But around 3 p.m., one of them, Klaus Bergman, hesitated. "Miss Morty," he said in careful German, "please understand my position. Marchetti is offering terms I cannot refuse, and he has made certain implications about what might happen if I decline." Threats. Marchetti was threatening him. I covered the phone and relayed this to Luca. His expression darkened. "Tell Klaus that threats mean Marchetti is already desperate. Tell him we'll triple his security detail and cover any costs associated with switching back to our roots. And tell him that we don't threaten, we simply outlast." I translated, and Klaus agreed immediately. When I hung up, Elena was standing in the doorway. "Marchetti just made a move against one of our warehouses in Brescia. Nothing violent, just regulatory inspection, probably bribed officials looking for code violations. He's trying to tie up our operations in bureaucracy." "Can he?" "Not if we move inventory before the inspectors arrive." She looked at Luca. "But that means using the alternate facility and revealing infrastructure we've kept quiet for exactly this scenario." Luca nodded. "Do it. Better to burn an advantage than lose the resources." The day spiraled into controlled chaos after that, moving inventory, rerouting shipments, managing partners who were getting nervous about the escalation. I translated, coordinated, and watched Luca orchestrate a response that was ruthlessly efficient without ever becoming violent. By 9 p.m., we'd stabilized most of the damage. But Elena pulled us into a secure office with news that made my stomach drop. "Marchetti's making noise about hosting a cultural event next week, art gallery opening in Florence. He's positioning it as a peace offering, inviting all the major players to demonstrate he wants to de-escalate." "Which means it's a trap," Luca said immediately. "Obviously, but if you don't attend, you look weak or afraid. If you do attend, he'll have home field advantage and probably some kind of ambush planned. Then we attend, but we control what he can ambush." Luca looked at me. "You'll come as my translator for the evening. Public, visible, demonstrating we're conducting business as usual." "Is that safe?" "Safety is relative, but I'll have security present, alternate routes planned, and contingencies for everything I can predict." He met my eyes. "The question is whether you're willing to be that visible. Once Marchetti sees you at my side at a major social event, you become a permanent piece on the board." I thought about Nana's words, about choosing what to build with what I knew. "I'll come." Something shifted in Luca's expression. Not quite approval, but acknowledgement of the choice I'd made. "Then we prepare. Elena, start vetting the venue for exits and vulnerabilities. I want to know every way in and out, every camera blind spot, every potential pressure point. Over the next week, I learned what it meant to prepare for elegant warfare. Alina taught me how to read a room for hostile intent, how to identify undercover security versus undercover threats, how to position myself to never be isolated. Luca's security team briefed me on exit routes and safe protocols. Even the wardrobe became strategic. Alina selected a dress that was beautiful but allowed movement, shoes that could handle running if necessary. "You're preparing for a war at an art gallery," I said to Luca the night before we left. "I'm preparing for possibilities," he corrected. "Most likely, Marchetti will simply try to embarrass me politically or demonstrate his alliances. But it's the unlikely scenarios that get people killed." We were in his office, late enough that the rest of the staff had gone home. Milan spread below us in a carpet of lights, beautiful and indifferent. "My grandmother knew your father," I said quietly. He went very still. "Did she?" "He employed my grandfather briefly. Accounting work. Legitimate business only. She said Salvatore let him leave without consequences when he wanted a different life. My father had principles about letting people choose their path. It made him generous and vulnerable in equal measure." Luca's voice was neutral, but something in his posture had tensed. "Is that what you're asking for? Permission to leave?" "No, I'm asking if you learned that from him, the letting go." He turned to face me fully, and for once, his careful control slipped enough to show something raw underneath. "I learned that letting people choose their path doesn't mean they choose survival. My father let someone go who should have stayed, who should have been protected. That person testified against him to save themselves. My father died in prison because he believed in choice over control." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me that loyalty has to be earned through more than ideology. It requires incentive, protection, and clear mutual benefit. That's why I arranged for your grandmother's care, why I pay you well, why I invest in your security. Not out of kindness, but because it builds the kind of loyalty choice alone cannot guarantee." It should have sounded cold. Instead, it sounded honest. "And what happens when my grandmother passes?" I asked. "When that incentive is gone?" He moved closer and I could smell that cedar smoke cologne that had become familiar now. "Then we'll find new incentive. Or you'll choose to leave and I'll let you because forcing loyalty creates enemies." His hand came up, not quite touching my face but close enough to feel the warmth. "But I don't think you'll leave, Chiara. I think you've discovered you're good at this work, that being visible matters to you, that you want to build something instead of just surviving." "You're very certain." "I'm very observant." His hand dropped. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will require all your focus." I left feeling like I'd just been seen more clearly than I'd ever wanted to be. And knowing he was right, I didn't want to leave anymore. I wanted to see what I could become in this world, even knowing it might consume me. Florence was beautiful in the way that made you forget danger, could exist somewhere so saturated with art and history. We arrived the afternoon before the gallery opening, taking over an entire floor of a boutique hotel near the Arno. Luca's security team had already swept the venue, identified Marchetti's people, and mapped every exit and approach. "He's invited 20 key players," Alina briefed us, "showing off his alliance network, demonstrating strength, but he's also invited press, legitimate art journalists covering the gallery opening. That's unusual. He wants witnesses for something." "For whatever humiliation he's planning," Luca said. "He can't move against me violently with press present, so he'll attempt to damage my reputation or credibility instead." "How do we counter that?" "By being exactly what we are, professional, competent, unshakable. If he has nothing to work with, his trap collapses." The gallery opening was at 7. Alina had outdone herself with my wardrobe. A dress in midnight blue that looked elegant but allowed movement. Hair pinned up to keep my sight lines clear, minimal jewelry, except for a pair of pearl earrings that were actually a discreet communication device. Luca can hear you through these if you tap twice, Alina explained. And you can hear him. If anything goes wrong, signal and move toward the north exit. That's where our people are concentrated. When Luca saw me, something shifted in his expression. You look like you belong in this world. I'm not sure that's a compliment. It is. He offered his arm. Stay close, translate when needed, and remember you're under my protection. That means something even to Marchetti. The gallery was spectacular. A converted Renaissance palazzo, all frescoed ceilings and marble floors, filled with contemporary art that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Marchetti had positioned himself as a patron, using culture as a mask for criminality, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The other players were already circulating. Valentina Russo examining paintings with genuine interest, Marco Talenti looking bored near the wine, Antonio Marchetti working the room like a politician, pressing flesh and radiating false warmth. When he saw Luca, his smile sharpened. Luca, so good of you to come. And you've brought your lovely translator, Chiara, wasn't it? He kissed both my cheeks, too familiar, his cologne aggressive and wrong. Welcome to Florence. I hope you enjoy the art. It's beautiful, I said neutrally. Yes, beauty is important, don't you think? It makes us forget the uglier aspects of business. His eyes moved between Luca and me. Though I imagine some people can't separate the two, they mix beauty and business until they can't tell which is which. The implication was clear. He thought I was sleeping with Luca, that my position was based on something other than competence. Luca's hand moved to the small of my back, protective and possessive. Chiara is here because she's the best translator I've employed. If you're questioning her qualifications, Marchetti, I'm happy to have her review your operations communications. I'm certain she'd find interesting discrepancies. It was a perfect deflection, turning the insult into a threat. Marchetti's smile tightened. No need, I'm sure she's very thorough. He moved away to greet other guests, and I felt Luca's hand tighten briefly on my back. He's going to make a move, I murmured. Yes, the question is what kind. We circulated through the gallery, Luca greeting associates while I translated small talk and watched for threats. Valentina complimented my dress and asked questions about my background that were probably reconnaissance. Marco ignored me completely, which Alina had predicted meant he didn't see me as a threat, yet. Then halfway through the evening, Marchetti called for attention. Friends, colleagues, patrons of the arts, thank you for joining me tonight. This gallery represents something important, that even in our complex world, beauty and culture matter, that we are not simply businessmen but custodians of civilization. He was laying it on thick, playing for the press in the room. And to that end, I've invited some special guests tonight, representatives from the Financial Ministry's Cultural Oversight Division, here to discuss new initiatives for protecting Italy's artistic heritage. 3 people stepped forward, government officials, by their credentials and bearing. Luca's hand found mine squeezing once, a warning. These representatives are concerned about certain irregularities in art acquisition, Marchetti continued smoothly. Specifically, questions about provenance and proper documentation. I've assured them that everyone here operates with complete transparency, but they've asked to speak with several key figures in the art world. Perhaps starting with. He looked directly at Luca. Those who handle significant pieces through private channels. It was a trap disguised as legitimate inquiry. If Luca refused to speak with the officials, he looked guilty. If he engaged, they'd dig into his operations looking for any irregularity to exploit. But Luca simply smiled. Of course, transparency is essential in protecting cultural heritage. Chiara, would you translate for the officials? I believe they'll want to understand exactly how we handle provenance verification. He turned it immediately into a demonstration of competence, using me to show he had nothing to hide while simultaneously putting the officials in a position where they'd have to conduct a legitimate inquiry instead of a fishing expedition. For the next 30 minutes, I translated a discussion of art acquisition practices, authentication procedures, and documentation standards. Luca answered every question with precise detail, referencing specific protocols and even offering to provide officials with documentation of recent acquisitions. The officials grew increasingly uncomfortable. They'd expected evasion or hostility, not thorough cooperation. When they finally excused themselves, Marchetti's expression was tight with frustration. But he wasn't done. Around 10 p.m., as the crowd thinned, I noticed movement near the entrances. New people arriving, not dressed for a gallery opening. Elena noticed too, her hand moving to her concealed communication device. Then Marchetti's voice cut through the room again. "I'm afraid we have unexpected guests. The financial police have received an anonymous tip about irregular activity at this venue tonight. They're here to conduct a routine investigation." Financial police. Not real threats of violence, but institutional weapons used to harass and intimidate. The room erupted in controlled chaos. Half the guests were probably involved in activities they didn't want investigators seeing, and Marchetti had just weaponized their collective paranoia. Luca's hand found mine immediately. "North exit, now." But as we moved, I saw Marchetti's security positioning themselves to block exits, not obviously, but deliberately creating bottlenecks that would slow anyone trying to leave. I tapped the pearl earring twice. "Elena," I whispered, "north exit is compromised. Where's our alternate?" "Service entrance, kitchen level. Marco is already there, looking nervous. He'll create chaos if needed." Her voice was calm in my ear. "Go now." Luca didn't question my direction, just followed as I navigated toward the service stairs. Years of working venues gave me instincts about backstage routes, and I found the kitchen entrance just as the financial police started demanding identification from guests. We slipped through, past startled catering staff, and emerged in an alley where one of Luca's cars waited. Inside the car, heading back toward the hotel, Luca finally spoke. "How did you know the north exit was compromised?" "Watched Marchetti's people position themselves. They were too careful about looking casual." I was shaking now, adrenaline catching up. He planned this whole thing, the officials, the financial police, blocking exits to force confrontation or make you look like you were fleeing. "And you navigated us out without anyone noticing." His hand covered mine, warm and steady. "You're very good at this, Chiara." "I'm good at finding service entrances. It's different." "Is it?" He studied my face. "You assessed threats, identified the solution, and executed without hesitation. That's not just finding exits, that's tactical thinking." Back at the hotel, Elena was already coordinating with the rest of the team, getting status reports from the other guests who'd extracted successfully. "Marchetti made himself look paranoid and incompetent," she reported. "Half his guests are furious about the financial police stunt. It makes them all look suspicious. He tried to embarrass you and ended up undermining his own alliance network." "Good." Luca poured wine, his movements controlled, but I could sense the tension underneath. "Chiara, you should rest. Tomorrow we return to Milan and begin capitalizing on Marchetti's mistake." But I didn't move. "He's not going to stop, is he?" "No, he's overcommitted now. He'll either win or destroy himself trying." Luca met my eyes. "Which means the next few weeks will be dangerous. For all of us, but especially for you. You're visible enough now that you could be used as leverage against me." "Is that what I am? Leverage?" The question hung between us, loaded with everything that had gone unspoken for the past month. He moved closer, and for the first time I saw uncertainty in his expression, not about tactics or logistics, but about something personal and uncharted. "You started as logistics," he said quietly. "A resource I needed, a competent translator who could help me navigate complex negotiations. But you've become something more complicated." "How complicated?" "Complicated enough that Marchetti has noticed. Complicated enough that I find myself arranging your grandmother's care not just to secure your loyalty, but because I want her final months to be peaceful. Complicated enough that, when you were navigating us through that gallery, I realized I trust your judgment more than I trust my own protective instincts." His hand came up to my face, and this time it made contact, warm against my cheek, his thumb brushing the corner of my jaw. "You're my weakness, Chiara, and that's dangerous for both of us." Then he kissed me. It wasn't rough or demanding. It was careful, almost questioning, giving me space to pull away. His mouth was warm, tasting of wine and the mint he always carried, and his free hand found the small of my back, pulling me closer. I kissed him back, my hands finding his shoulders, feeling the controlled strength in him. When we broke apart, his eyes were darker than I'd ever seen them. "I shouldn't have," he started. "No, you shouldn't have," I agreed, "but I wanted you to. That makes this more complicated." "Everything about this is complicated, Luca. You've arranged my entire life, bought my loyalty with my grandmother's care, made me valuable and visible and trapped all at once. And I pulled back, needing space to think. I need to know if this is manipulation or if it's real." "Both." He didn't try to pull me back. "I arranged your grandmother's care to secure your loyalty, that's true. But I continued arranging things, continued investing in your security and development, because somewhere in the last month you stopped being logistics and became someone I care about protecting. Not because you're useful, because you're you. That's a terrible foundation for anything." "Yes." He turned away, running a hand through his hair, the first time I'd seen him visibly uncertain. "Which is why we should stop this now, before it becomes something neither of us can afford." But I didn't want to stop. I wanted to lean into this feeling, this visibility, this mattering to someone who saw me clearly and still chose to protect me, even knowing it was built on beautiful chains and careful leverage. "Luca," I said quietly. He turned back, and I saw everything he usually kept controlled flickering in his expression, want and caution and something that might have been hope. I crossed the distance between us and kissed him again, this time with certainty instead of question. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath warm and unsteady. "This changes things," he murmured. "I know. Marchetti will use it as a weapon if he finds out." "Then we don't let him find out." He laughed quietly, the sound surprising and genuine. "You're adapting to this world very quickly." I had a good teacher. We stood like that for a long moment. The city of Florence spread below us, beautiful and indifferent to the complicated thing growing between two people who should probably have known better. Then Luca's phone buzzed, Alina, with updates that required immediate attention. He pulled away reluctantly. "We should rest. Tomorrow will be demanding." "When isn't it?" "Fair point." He walked me to the door, his hand lingering on mine. "Chiara, what I said about you being my weakness, that makes you powerful. Use it wisely." Then he was gone, back to logistics and strategies, leaving me alone with the ghost of his touch and the terrifying knowledge that I just let myself fall for someone who'd trapped me as carefully as he'd protected me. And I wasn't sure which I should be more afraid of, the falling, or how much I wanted to keep falling. We returned to Milan the next morning. The drive was quiet, both of us processing what had happened in Florence. Luca worked on his tablet, coordinating responses to Marchetti's failed ambush, while I stared out the window and tried to understand what I'd become. A month ago, I'd been invisible. Now I was so visible I'd become a weapon people could use against each other. And I'd kiss the man who'd made me visible, knowing it would complicate everything, but unable to stop myself. Alina was waiting when we arrived at the office, her expression grim. "Marchetti's escalating," she said without preamble. "He's making moves on 3 of our operations simultaneously, trying to overwhelm our response capacity. And he's spreading rumors that you're losing control, Luca, that the Florence incident shows weakness. Then we demonstrate strength." Luca's voice was controlled, back to the tactical mind I'd come to recognize. "Hit back at his most vulnerable operations. Nothing violent, just financial pressure and strategic partner recruitment. Make it clear that escalation costs him more than it costs us." For the next week, I lived in the office, translating urgent communications, helping coordinate responses, watching Luca orchestrate a counteroffensive that was ruthlessly efficient. We didn't sleep much. We barely saw daylight. But slowly, methodically, we turned Marchetti's aggression against him. Every move he made created new vulnerabilities we exploited. Every partner he pressured became someone we could recruit. Late one night, after the staff had gone home, Luca found me in my office reviewing files. "You should rest," he said. "So should you." "I will, after I convince you to stop working for tonight." He pulled up a chair, his proximity careful. We hadn't touched since Florence, both of us aware that starting something in the middle of a conflict was dangerous. "Marchetti's overextended," I said, showing him the analysis I'd been building. "He's funding 3 simultaneous operations by borrowing from partners who expect returns quickly. If we can delay his revenue streams by even 2 weeks, he'll start having liquidity problems." Luca studied my work, something like pride flickering across his face. "You've learned quickly." I had good motivation. I don't want to die because some rival decides I'm useful leverage. "You won't." He said it with absolute certainty. "I've updated all security protocols. Your grandmother has a protection detail she doesn't know about. Your apartment has surveillance. If Marchetti even thinks about moving against you, I'll know before he acts." That's not comforting, Luca. That's proof of how dangerous this has become. Yes, he didn't apologize or soften it, but it's reality. You're in the center of this now. The question is whether you're going to survive it or shape it. I thought about Nana's words again, about being the voice that reminded people that logistics involved human lives. What if I could negotiate a way out? I asked suddenly. What if I could talk to Marchetti, find common ground that de-escalates without either of you losing face? Luca went very still. That's extremely dangerous. So is letting this spiral into open warfare. You said it yourself. Violence is expensive and draws attention, but so is prolonged conflict. If I could find a resolution that leaves both organizations intact, wouldn't that be worth the risk? Not if it gets you killed. But if it works. Chiara, he took my hands, his grip tight. You're thinking like this is a contract negotiation. It's not. Marchetti doesn't want resolution, he wants dominance. Offering him compromise will make you look naive and make me look weak for sending you. Then what's your plan? Bleed him until he collapses and hope no one gets caught in the crossfire. Yes, because that's the only way to end this without escalating to violence. We stared at each other, the disagreement sitting between us like a wall. Finally, I pulled my hands free. My grandmother is dying, Luca. Every week of conflict is a week I'm not spending with her because I'm caught up in your war with Marchetti. If there's any chance I can end this faster, I have to try. Something in his expression shifted, not anger, but a kind of pained understanding. Your grandmother, he said quietly. How much time does Dr. Bavaud estimate? 6 weeks, maybe 8. Then you're not negotiating with Marchetti. You're spending every moment you can with her, and I'll handle the conflict. His tone left no room for argument. That's not negotiable, Chiara. I won't let you risk yourself in a futile attempt to accelerate something that has its own timeline. You can't just decide. I can, and I am. You're too valuable to lose, and your grandmother deserves to spend her final weeks with you present, not distracted by negotiations with a man who'd use you as leverage the moment you walked into the room. He was right, and I hated it. I feel useless, I whispered. You're not useless, you're human, there's a difference. He stood, pulling me up with him. Go home, spend tomorrow with your grandmother. I'll have Elena coordinate coverage for your translation work. When you come back, we'll be in a stronger position, and you'll have had time with the person who matters most. I wanted to argue, to insist I could handle both. But I was so tired, and the thought of sitting with Nana without the weight of urgency and conflict pressing down felt like oxygen after drowning. Thank you, I managed. He kissed my forehead, gentle and brief. Go, before I change my mind and keep you here out of pure selfishness.